beautiful people. And welcome to episode 25 of Survivor Strong. I'm so happy to have you here with me. Of course, this is the podcast for survivors of childhood trauma. Today's guest we have is Julie Bonn Blank. And Julie, I see that you're here. I'm going to send you an invitation to the video. So you should see that, and then just accept it and you should be able to pop right in. Julie is a survivor of child sexual abuse and multiple abusive relationships, including a 17-year marriage that really came to a tragic end. I was shocked when I read about this situation. Julie has since become a certified domestic abuse advocate, abuse recovery trainer, and a facilitator of the Survivor Voices Committee for the Family Justice Center of Washington County, Oregon. So I gave your intro that, you all of the wonderful things that you do within this community. And so, officially now that you're here on video, I can welcome you to Survivor Strong. I'm so happy to have you here with me.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Can you just tell us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. I'm obviously a survivor, or I would not be on your show. But I have been able to work a lot on my healing. Healing is ongoing, as many of us know, and really turn it into advocacy. And I really felt called to do that. And not all people do who are survivors, but I'm kind of a type A. And so literally I marched into recovery groups because I was like, okay, I'm going to learn this and I'm going to teach these people, that they don't have to stay in these relationships and that they can be healed and they can be strong and all of that. And literally I marched out of recovery group going, this was for me, and I so needed that. And so I ended up taking probably 3 cycles of a certain recovery group that I now work for the company before I started leading as a volunteer. And then I actually came on staff with them 4 years ago. So I do coaching and advocacy work. I also facilitate a Survivor Voices Committee for Washington County in the lovely state of Oregon. And we work a lot on laws that need changed. And one of the most recent ones, we have seen far too many kids be returned to their abusive parent. And so one of the ones we're working on right now would require not only judges training and legal training for everybody in the court system on domestic violence, but it would allow for, if there's ever been any abuse in the home whatsoever, that they then pull an advocate in to do a preliminary, judgment, so to speak, a preliminary recommendation on whether they really should, have access to their kiddos or not. And I'm hopeful that that's going to pass and make a lot of changes in the state. Yeah.
That's amazing. Congratulations on that, on just doing that work. I mean, there are so many laws that I could get into as far as, child marriage laws. I mean, so many things, that need to be addressed. So you're definitely right where you need to be to make those changes, right? So How long have you been doing this?
So it kind of varies because it was actually, it's actually been 10 years, 11 years now when I started leading recovery groups for ARMS, which stands for Abuse Recovery Ministry and Services. It's a faith-based recovery program that's free for all women survivors ages 14 and up. I find it interesting that you mentioned the marriage. I'll go back to that because we have had gals of age 14 or 13, especially in other countries, but also here in the United States that were forced into marriage that have found, great recovery in our program. So I've been doing that for 11 years and slowly but surely, I've worked on the rest of my healing, and writing was something I've always loved to do, but I was unable to do when I was in a lot of trauma, in my abuse. And so as part of my healing process, I felt called to start doing that, as well. And then 4 years ago, I came on staff at ARMS and I took my certified advocacy training. It's been 2 years now. The Family Justice Center portion, as far as doing the Survivor Voices Committee, has been 3 years now since we started that. So I'm a newbie, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Hey, that's all right. That's all right. But you come with a lot of personal experience and a lot of passion. and that's what matters. That's what counts. And so, as an advocate, what kind of services, do you provide, or does the organization that you work with provide?
So the organization I work with has three programs, and one is for survivors, and it's called Her Journey. And often we have ladies in class that are still in abuse. Often Her Journey is their route to getting strong and to finding their community and their tribe, and understanding that they don't have to be in this situation. That's never the plan for them to be in an abusive situation. And so there's that program, which is the widest. We've helped over 35,000 women at this point with that program. And then we also have two intervention groups, and they are one for men and one for women. And technically the word on the street, the word in the DV industry is batterers intervention, whether that person has actually battered somebody or not. That is the BIP. It is the term
Okay.
here in the United States for intervention programs. So we have one for men and one for women who have chosen controlling behaviors, because when we were just doing victim services, we realized we were only addressing half the problem.
Right,
We
right.
needed to address the rest. Yeah. And so I do that. I'm oftentimes the coach. I am the person in the organization that takes, the victim calls and follows up, with the victims, gets them
Wow.
into group. And I oversee all our Her Journey groups, as well as our Her Journey leaders as well. So a big part of what I do is training and education. So I wrote the
Wow.
13-week domestic violence faith-based advocacy program that we teach. It's all online, so it's open to anybody. But if anybody wants to be a facilitator of our groups, they have to take that as part of their training process.
Training.
So I'm a
Right.
leader for that as well. Yeah.
So you're like right in the trenches. You're in the
And
trenches with everything.
yeah.
It sounds like from beginning
Mhm.
all the way through your support and through the end as a trainer. How do you help victims recover when they're, at that point?
Yeah, that's a good question, because everybody's healing process is a bit different.
Yeah.
And as much as I would love to go into my recovery groups that I lead and say, okay, here's your your 5 steps to healing. It sounds like a blog.
Right,
Like,
right,
what are
yeah.
your 5 steps to healing? You do this and you'll be healed forever and it's done, and that's not the way it is. And everybody's journey is different. So as a coach and an advocate, I tend to walk alongside more people. And of course, I share things that have worked, for me, or that I've seen worked for my other gals. But when it comes down to it, you could interview, and you probably have, you've interviewed 25, right? Survivors, and each one of their paths has been different, and not one path is right, for all.
Of course.
Part of my path was, not only teaching and training, but really, I think you and I chatted a little bit the other day about putting together a timeline of,
Yes.
our trauma, in our life. And I had never thought to do that before, but my husband now, I have a second marriage. It's very healthy. He works a lot in family systems theories. And that's one thing they do in their classes, is they put together a timeline of all the trauma in the family, all the divorces, any abuse that happened, losing jobs, being at the end of their financial rope, whatever it was, because that all has an impact on who we become, and how we work through that. And so I decided to take that concept and say, well, I'm going to figure some of this out. I'm going to figure out why I was vulnerable to abuse, why I didn't pay attention to red flags, like I should have. And for some reason, why I didn't think I was valuable enough to deserve,
Mm.
a better relationship. And some of that started in my childhood. And as I plotted it out on my timeline, I was contacted by family members and found out there was even more than I knew about. And it started even earlier. That made me vulnerable, to growing up and getting into abusive relationships. So that's been a part of my healing. But again, that's not for everybody. For some
Right.
people, they need therapy in addition to recovery groups. Much more so now, we're seeing the coaching industry take off for domestic violence, because the difference between coaches and counselors is that coaches have been there in
Mm-hmm.
that situation and can walk alongside and advise a little bit more on that versus the counselor. And then sometimes we see gals needing more extensive therapy. We've had a lot helped by EMDR therapy and by behavioral changes, and some of them come to recovery group and can't absorb it yet because they're so in their trauma. So literally, I've had ladies come to our Her Journey program that seem stuck there. They've come like 3 or 4 cycles. It's 15 weeks long, and they just keep coming. And then they said I went for EMDR, and then I came back and everything makes sense. They just were unable to absorb, the concepts
Yeah.
of being valuable and worth it, and building themselves up and all of that. And so,
And the thing is that that's really where therapy comes in. And this is
yes,
why therapy really is a crucial part of healing. It's a different level of healing. Not everybody can afford therapy, right?
right,
Not everybody, because therapy can be expensive. But the people that you have coming in cycle after cycle, that's giving you a sign that their trauma is much deeper,
right,
and perhaps they need a therapist. And maybe another level of your services could be, if you see someone continually returning, assist them in getting and finding a therapist, or to help with that, because you know we're just not qualified to offer the same advice, the same guidance as a therapist, right? I mean, they've gone to school, they have all of the tools, right? But I love how you have this, and you're so welcoming, and you're like, it doesn't matter where you are in
hmm,
your healing, you can come and be here, and we're here to support you. And that's really wonderful.
yeah.
You don't push anybody out. You don't,
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
no, no. Like, if someone who is really still deep in their trauma, you could say, sorry, we can't help you. Have a nice day.
Ah, right. That would
You,
be awful. Yeah. I'm
right,
not into doing that. Yeah.
right. But that does happen, unfortunately.
It does. And we find
Yeah.
we do encourage counseling along with her journey. And we also have recommended coaches and counselors on our website.
Oh,
But here's the thing. We have discovered over 25 years of doing this at ARMS. I've not been there that long, but unfortunately, that not all counselors are abuse informed.
no, they're
And
not.
so we work with many of them, with many ladies that come in, and literally probably 75% of the girls in our recovery group have had some kind of secondary abusive experience because of who they chose to go to, who did not have a proper response to their
Right.
abuse. And so we only put even counselors, even PhDs on our site if they've had our 13-week advocacy training, and if we've talked to them quite a bit and they are abuse informed, because there's just so many
That's
out there
That's
that are not.
brilliant.
Yeah.
And you know what? You're absolutely right about that. And, and this is just information for the people that come into your program.
Mhm.
Um, Look for specialists. People, when they're looking for a therapist, find someone who specializes in trauma therapy,
Mhm.
because domestic violence is trauma.
Yep.
you know any violence, anything like that, you need someone who's specialized in that, because what I have seen in the past is, a lot of times I've seen people go to their church groups,
Mhm.
and their friends and family, and even though they can find love and support there, those people can't help them.
Right.
Like, they don't necessarily know what to do, and what can happen is they can end up hurting them more by giving advice that they shouldn't be giving, right?
Yep.
So I highly encourage people to make sure that they're finding a counselor who is specialized in their particular trauma, because, like you said, those secondary um, traumatizing happens, because they're like re-traumatized, because they're like, wait, I thought I was going to this person who was going to help me, and they don't know what the heck they're doing.
Yep.
It's like, so it's hard to open up, because when you change therapist, you have to start all over again. Right?
Right. That's
To
so hard.
start.
Yeah.
Oh, so hard. So a lot of people are like, forget that, I'm not going to do that. Who's got time for that?
Well, and the same happens with our leaders. Like you mentioned, churches and church groups, and so at ARMS we do a lot of training for pastors and leaders in the church. But we do run across many still that do not want to be abuse informed.
Right.
And that is the hard part. They don't want to believe they have a problem. I connected
Right.
with a church a few weeks ago, and they literally told us on the phone, we don't have an abuse problem. And
Wow.
they hung up, and then I went to their website, and they had 70 or 80 staff members, including elders and leaders, small group leaders, and all of that. And every single one of them was male. And I was like,
Wow.
you do have an abuse problem, but you're not willing to go there yet. So, what can
No.
I do except, keep pushing it out a little bit and saying we're ready when
Yeah.
you decide that you are ready. But there is a lot of that. There's a lot of that in our churches too, that they see themselves as a failure if they can't keep this marriage together. Right.
Right.
And so
Right.
the marriage in itself or relationship has become a higher priority than the people within it. And
Right.
that is the scary part. And so
That
people need to
is
realize that within our faith communities, the stats are exactly the same as they are outside, which means,
yeah,
3 to 4 women in 10 and 2 to 3 men within 10 have experienced domestic abuse.
that's right. And another thing, and I just have to say this, a lot of people, and I've encountered this, especially, excuse me, people who are affiliated with church or some type of religion, they say to me, I don't need therapy because I have God. God is
Yep.
going to get me through. And
Yeah.
here's what I have to say about that.
I knew you had something to say about
If you have a broken leg, is God
that.
going to heal that broken leg, or do you have to go to the hospital and get a cast and have the doctor do it? Right?
Right.
You
Right.
know,
You've got to
God.
recognize that God will use people on this earth, to help
Yes,
you through
yes.
these things.
He
Yeah.
can
And
give you
does he do
comfort.
miracles? Absolutely he does miracles, but the majority of time, it's his people that have
Right,
learned and trained, and we need to
right,
take advantage of that.
right.
Right.
Especially when it comes to trauma,
Yes.
right? Because it's so deep, and because so many people are not trauma informed,
Hmm.
they say things without even realizing that could be minimizing, that could be victim blaming, and this re-traumatizes, right?
Yep.
It just keeps re-traumatizing all over again. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And like I said, I know your personal history played some role in your desire to get into this line of work. So let's go back a little bit. You bravely shared with me that you were abused by a 28-year-old man over a span of time between the ages of 13 and 14. Do you feel comfortable telling us a little bit more about that? I have specific questions about it. If you want, I can just ask my specific questions. I know for me that's easier than just kind of like, well, here's what it is. Like I need questions so I can stay on track.
I hear you. Well, how about I give a briefing and then you can ask any questions you might have?
Beautiful,
Okay.
beautiful.
So yes, I this was a situation that I was pretty vulnerable to, I believe, and I was 13 at the time, and it was a gentleman, right, who was at our church, and worked with the youth group, and also was in choir. I was in choir with him, and started providing me rides back and forth to those things, and we developed what I would have called a friendship at the time. And to be honest, I fell in love with this guy. And I so much so that when he did move away a year and a half or so later, I literally cried every day for a year when I woke up because he was not in my life. We wrote letters. This was pre-email time and texting time. But yes, things were inappropriate, and my parents tried to tell me at the time. They were cautious about what they said because they knew I had feelings involved. And back then they didn't. You didn't really. This was the '80s. They didn't really recognize that there might have been abuse or grooming or any of that present like they would these days when the antenna would go up.
Oh, right.
But they did say, I think 2 or 3 times to me, this is A, not appropriate, and B, he is, I think my dad said once, Julie, he is seeking something in his own life that is filled by doing this, by, having you as his special friend. And that's not right. He's only thinking of himself. He's not thinking of you and the fact that you're only 13. And of course, as a 13-year-old, I'm rolling my eyes and saying, whatever,
Yeah,
whatever,
of course. Yep.
this guy's a great guy. But looking back, I really see, I mean, it did, there was touching involved. It did get inappropriate in that regard. And any I have to look back and say any normal 28-year-old should have had some red flags in their head and said, I shouldn't be doing this with a
Yeah.
13-year-old
Yeah.
girl. But it was done, and it was done very selfishly, and my heart got wrapped up in it. And so as I looked back, that didn't end up being the start. I thought that was the start of my timeline. I really, really did. I wrote it down. I was like, and I was at the beginning of the paper. I had to rip it up and start over, because then later I found out there was some earlier childhood stuff in there, as well. But yes, these days I think parents would have been much more on it and said my kid's 13, and maybe even called the cops.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Did not happen back then.
They wouldn't let him give you a ride home. That
Oh,
wouldn't be acceptable.
I would hope not. I have kiddos myself, and I never would have allowed that, at age 13.
No,
Yeah.
of course not. And it's same here. Same
Yeah.
here. I have 2 daughters, and I can't imagine either of them coming home at 13 saying, "Oh, I'm in love with this 28-year-old man, and this 28-year-old man loves me back." What? No.
Yeah. And I have to be fair here to my parents, because I didn't really, I wasn't that detailed with them as far as my feelings for him.
Okay.
So, that might have been part of it as well. And plus, as we've talked about, I was in the church community, right? And what can go wrong there? And you trust everybody there. And it's really only been in recent years that we've realized, hey, predators can be within the church, and maybe even more so in the church,
Yes.
than other places. So it's important to realize as a parent, don't trust everybody, right?
Absolutely. And, so how did he begin to groom you? How did this all start? How did it go from just some guy that you knew to, wow, I think this guy's interested in me?
I've got some blanks there in my memory. But from what I believe it started, it was just with the rides back and forth, because we were in choir together and I couldn't drive yet. And for my folks, it was convenient because they had,
Sure.
3 kids, and my older brother was very involved in sports. So they were always, out at his games. And so if I wanted to be involved in those things, it was a way to get a ride, back and forth. And that person was very open to doing that. And I think that I especially in the beginning, I had a traumatic teenagerhood. As I look back, I have journals full of my heartbreak as a teenager, but he was a listening ear. I didn't have that elsewhere, outside of my family. There wasn't anybody that would really, listen and understand, and even, touch me, pat me on my shoulder, rub my shoulders, and say, "I'm so sorry, this is going on." And he really put himself in that role of, I'm her counselor, so to speak, if you want to think of it that way, or I'm the person. And what it should have been was this person saying, "I'm sorry you went through that. Let me find you a female, let me find you an adult gal that you can talk to, about some of these things." Right. And instead he took on that very nurturing role. And I, of course, was drawn like a moth to a flame,
Yeah,
for that. So it all started very emotionally for me, which is why it allowed my feelings to, to get where they were.
Right.
But again,
I do I do feel compelled to say this.
Okay.
Because you've brought up your age multiple times, and how you loved him and you had all these feelings for him. It's almost like you're blaming yourself.
Yes.
Because you had feelings for him. At 13, you didn't have feelings for him. You just didn't know that at the time, right? At 13, you were being manipulated by an adult.
Yes, I was. And I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I wouldn't, in my role now, if I had a 13-year-old come to me, or somebody come and say, this happened at 13, I would be saying the exact, same thing. So sometimes we need to remind ourselves, right, of what we help everybody else work through. So yes, it was not my fault. I concur with that, and hope that he got help. I don't know. We lost touch over the years, and that's all one can hope for. Oh, you disappeared and you muted.
I'm back. Sorry about that. My fireside crashed unexpectedly, but I'm back now.
The downside of live shows.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, so I did hear that you were blaming yourself, so I had to speak up and say, no, it's not your fault.
Thank you.
It was never your fault. It didn't matter how you felt about him, how you thought you felt about him. Mm-hmm. That has no bearing on how he groomed you, he manipulated you, and he created this scenario where he was your confidant.
Right.
And of course, you're a young lady, you're going to be drawn to that, like you said, so how long did it take for things to cross the line further as far as just chatting to the touching? How long did that take?
It wasn't long. I would say even within probably the first 6 weeks, we would start with just, him touching me casually, like on the shoulder, or have a good day, or, all of that. And so he was pretty good at working into that. I don't know if he had experience in that. I also know that he was touchy with other people in our congregation. It wasn't just me. And some of them were of age and some of them were not. And so I told myself over the years, and here we go again, right, that he
Yeah.
was just a touchy person, right? But no, it was inappropriate with a 13-year-old and never should have started. But yeah, 4 to 6 weeks in,
So,
that's
so 4 to 6 weeks of grooming.
mhm.
4 to 6 weeks of grooming before he took that step, because it's so important for people to understand that these pedophiles, they don't strike right away. They don't just jump on you. They wait to gain your trust, to gain the trust of your parents,
Mhm.
and then it's when you think that you can trust them when they attack. So, I it was so important to know that timeline, because that just speaks to it took 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks of him making you feel like everything was okay. And um, wow, just shows you, just these people, they take their time, right? they
Yeah.
they really get to know you,
Mhm.
and it's scary.
I would say they invest. And I think that's what they would. And I've heard of other situations that even take longer,
Yep.
But unlike somebody that's going to jump out of the bushes and attack you, while you're jogging, it's very calculated. And I think that's what people need to, remember that in their head, they're like, I need to build her trust. I
Yep.
need to work on this. I need to be there for her. I need to, she needs to think I'm her best friend, and that's when she's going to let go a little bit and emotionally allow this to happen without running to the parents or whatever. And so I think they do a very use calculation and invest the time in the interest of that. And who knows how many other people are doing to, at the same time. I would have
Well, yeah,
had, if I'd known, because to me it was a special, relationship. But
that's just
I'm
it.
sure I wasn't the only one. Yeah,
Right.
looking back.
And that's just it. It was a special relationship. Do you guys hear that? These perpetrators make their victims feel special. It's it's not always scary. It's not always a stranger, hiding in an alleyway. These are people that that they gain your trust. Now that's why it's so important to know who is in your circle. Because like you said, one of my questions is, did he have similar relationships with any other kids at the church? But you kind of answered that, because you said he was kind of touchy with everybody,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that chances are that he was maybe not at the same time as you, but
Mm-hmm.
throughout the years, right? Because
Right.
you said that he moved away eventually, and that's how everything ended, because he moved away.
Right.
Why did he move away? Was it business? Was
It was a job. Yeah. He took a
okay.
job in a state that was two away from us. And now I look back, I see that was God saving me. So thank
Absolutely.
God he went, even though it was very painful at the time, And then we continued. We wrote letters. I still have his letters, actually. Um, you know,
Wow.
of this. So I don't know if he hoped from afar we could continue somewhat, but eventually, I got busy. I was a teenager, and those kind of drifted off. But yeah, he did pursue even after he, in that regard,
Yeah.
even after he moved, with
How
communication.
long? How long did you communicate with the letters?
Oh, a couple of years at least. Yeah.
Years?
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Oh my
Because,
gosh.
I was special, right?
Right. Right. Of course. Of course.
Yeah.
And so he was never held accountable for anything, I'm assuming.
Correct. As far as I know, he never was. When I was working on my healing really hard, I did try to get a hold of him once on social media and say, I'd like to put this to rest. And can we talk about this? And I was blocked, immediately, of course. So, said person went on to have family and get married and have 4 kids. And I can only hope that said person, as he realized and had children, that, he realized, gosh, if somebody was doing this to my 13-year-old, that would be very inappropriate. And, I don't know. I don't know where that all landed, and I don't care where that all landed. I'm okay with that. And I
Right.
won't try to reach out again. That was kind of a one time. I'll see if this works so I can maybe talk through this, and now obviously in my recovery since, I've learned that that's not really the best route to go. In fact, we should never turn back to our abusers and try to smooth things over or ask why, or, why did you do this to me? And that we think that will bring us healing, but in reality, it won't, because the majority of time they will not even recognize it or know they did it, or they know they did it and they don't care, or we
Which
have a
is
lot of, you know,
traumatizing.
it is re-traumatizing. And so now, I work with ladies all the time. And I had one last week who's kind of chasing after her husband, who has been extremely abusive, a lot of property damage, and scary, just scary.
Yeah.
And she's like, why won't you get help? I want you to come back and I don't want to do this. And I said, you know what, sweetie, let's talk about this. I said, because anytime they want to communicate with their abusers, I ask them why. I said, I need you to think in your head and to let me know, what is your motive? What are you hoping to accomplish? And usually it's, well, he'll tell me he's sorry, or he'll recognize what he's done, or he'll realize how much this is affecting our family. And then I have to tell them the stark, cold reality is, if you choose to communicate with them in this way, and it is your choice, it's not mine, it's yours, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But you are highly likely not to get that result that you're looking for.
Right.
And then what are you going to feel? And they're like, yeah, you're probably right. And I do know I'm right, because, that's what happened. Been there, done that. So very rarely will we get the response we want from the people who have traumatized us or been abusive. I've rarely seen it, rarely. And to keep that in mind when we're trying to reach out, try to figure out what you really want in that process and what your goal is.
Right. No, absolutely. Because a lot of times that's, part of repetition compulsion too,
Right.
going back to abusive relationships, going back to abusive situations. And that's kind of a cycle that is kind of built over years of abusive relationships and all of these things that happen. So there's so many factors that would make someone want to reach back out to
Mm-hmm.
them. But it's so
Right.
important that you point out that you're not always going to get, and most of the time, you're not going to get the response that you're looking for, and that really it's not worth the risk.
Right.
It's not worth the risk of re traumatizing yourself.
Right.
We,
Our healing does not depend on our abuser and whether they
no,
ever admit things happened, or whether they ever give an apology, or whether they even validate what we're feeling. And we think it does because our pain comes from them, but our healing does not. Our healing comes from stepping away and working on ourselves and our own healing without pulling them into it. That's where true healing is able to come into play.
that is so true. 1,000%. I agree with that. And you also shared that you learned, later in life that there were other abuses, and you kind of alluded to that earlier as well, that your grandpa
Mhm.
had sexually abused your cousins and had also attempted to abuse you. Do you remember that happening? Or is that one of those situations where someone told you, no, this happened, you just don't remember it?
No, I specifically remember. Now, it didn't get as far with me as it did with them. He
Okay.
used, apparently, from what I'm hearing from my girl cousins now, he used to give them baths
Mm,
and everything, and that grandma knew what was going on. I found that so hard to believe, but I believe them. I do.
no,
But with
yeah,
me, I was pretty squirmy. I don't know if you picked that up or not, but I'm stubborn. I was born
yeah.
stubborn. And so I specifically remember him pulling onto my lap and fondling my chest. And
Mm-hmm.
I was young, and I squirmed so hard that he finally let me go because I was hurting. I was kicking and squirming.
How old were
And
you?
I was 6 at the time.
Wow.
And then he died when I was 8. So he died. He was alcoholic, and he died 2 years later. And so nothing went forward with me that I remember at
Wow.
that time. And that did not come back into my memory until my girl cousins came forward and said, this has happened. And I was like, and they knew I was in the industry. They knew I'm an advocate. So they felt safe
Right.
telling
Sure.
me. Yeah. And
Well,
that's when it all was like, wait a minute.
yeah, I have to tell you, 1,000% know firsthand the impact that this must have had on you, because my grandfather fondled my breast one time, one
Mm,
time, when I was 11 years old, and I've never been able to forget it. It's
I'm sorry.
something that really sticks with you for life, right? I mean, a lot of people think, "Oh, it only happened one time. It's not a big deal." No, once is too many, and once is going to stay with you. And like you said, your psyche had blocked that memory until your cousins came to you, and then you were like, "Oh no, I do remember
Mm-hmm.
that happening." But your psyche wouldn't have blocked it out if it was no big deal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's very
So
true. And I'm sorry to hear that you had that experience as well. There's nothing worse than somebody, that you trust and
yeah.
is in your family that should be absolutely taking the best care of you as possible. That breaks that. That breaks
Oh,
that boundary.
absolutely. And I've written a book called The Invisible Girl. It's my memoir, where I talk about my life and my history, and I have a lot of history, sexual assault, rapes, molestations, incest, physical abuse, etc. So yeah, I can come from a place of understanding from all of those places, and how do you think this incident with your grandpa in particular has affected you?
I think it broke trust because I think we automatically trust our family members. And my dad worked really hard to get away from, not get away from the family, but to take a different route. So if we look at the history, which was another timeline, but still a good thing to do,
Mhm.
all of my dad's brothers and sisters were addicted in some way, shape, or form. And my grandpa was as well, which you heard.
Yeah.
So I guess passed down from there, right?
Yep.
Now, my dad in high school very deliberately took a step aside from that in the family. And he started going to church and he decided he's not going to go that route. And thank God I came from his branch, because this is what I tell my ladies, because this is what happened to me, that I looked around the table at Thanksgiving a few years ago. My dad had 19 descendants at the time, and now he has, I think, 23. And I was like, Dad broke that cycle of alcohol abuse in our family
We sure
by
did.
stepping aside and having, all of us. And as you can imagine, all my aunts and uncles are gone now, and a lot of my cousins have followed suit. And so I think it did break trust, because as a little girl you kind of automatically trust your family. And plus I was pretty innocent at the time, so I had no idea and really what was going on until this all came out later. But I have to say that it was never a good feeling with the men in our family. They, on my dad's side, my mom's side was completely different. During family gatherings, they would gather out in the garage and they would drink. And there was a restroom out there in the shop. And sometimes when the house restroom was full, we would have to go out there to use the restroom. And I, to this day, remember that I had cousins and uncles that were leery, that made me uncomfortable. And I just could not pin that down at the time. I just would hurry and finish up and run, get back to the house as soon as I could. And so that trust, was an issue. It didn't feel like a safe place. Now that I'm an adult, I can look back and I can say that.
That it
And
wasn't.
now I know more of that, because I think probably more of that has gone on in our family than I'd like to admit. So I would say it had pretty far reaching impacts. And then, as I mentioned to you, I had another incident come up as well. That was even earlier than that. A family member actually apologized to me. And for touching me and spying on me. And I was in the middle of a book signing. I was signing my book, Innocent Lies, at a book signing, when this person texted me and said, long text, I need to apologize, and da 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 da. And I panicked. I had a panic attack. My heart started beating. I'm like, I have to leave. And they're like, you can't leave. You got to sign these books. And I'm like, I got to go. And I got through it and I got out of there and I was driving home and I'm like, you know what? I said, I am not going to respond like a victim. I said, I have worked through my trauma. I am in the field helping people. The fact that I felt so panicky when this person told me that, I need to back it off. And I did. I took a deep breath and I worked on I have trauma therapy exercises that I work through when I have a panic attack. And I was able to come home and be strong and tell my husband and talk to about it, and I shed a few tears, but my response was so different than it would have been, in the old days when I was still living in my trauma and hadn't worked so very, very hard on my healing. But I think that both those incidences, and one was more obviously long going than the
Yeah.
other, did
Right.
impact me. And I think that going into this relationship at the age of 13, that I was especially vulnerable to that because that's how I thought things were supposed to be.
Right. Well, and also just going back to your grandpa for a second too, think about the intergenerational, your cousin's telling you that your grandmother knew what was going on,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that's so hard to believe, but that's the intergenerational things that I talk about so much. Grandma thought it was okay because it probably happened to grandma,
Right.
and somebody thought it was okay to happen to grandma, and so on and so forth, and it's just a cycle that continues. And for your grandma to know what was going on and to not do anything just shows you how distorted their thoughts are when it comes to the innocence of children.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's why, talking about your dad breaking the cycle of the alcoholism, it's so beautiful because that one act saved a whole
Yeah.
other generation from experiencing the same thing that he had to experience, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's the same with any type of trauma. And the scary fact is that a lot of times there are people that know that it's happening and they don't do anything about it because
Mm-hmm.
it's just happened to them, or they just don't understand what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know that wasn't easy for you to open up about your past like that. I really want to thank you because I know it wasn't easy. So, how do you think these experiences as kids set us up for abuse later in life?
Well, for starters, I think somebody's going to follow the normal path, right, that they've experienced because that's what they think is normal. The other thing is, I think we have a tendency to not recognize it as abuse because we've lived some of it already, and it's been since nothing was done about it. We see that as it was being accepted, right? Nobody
Hmm.
stepped in, nobody called the police, nobody said, "Gee, he shouldn't have touched you that way." Nobody was saying that, and so if they don't say that in our kid mind, we then start thinking, "Okay, this is a normal, and B, this probably happens to other people, not just me."
Hmm.
And see, I guess there's a subconscious piece in there that says, I expect this now going forward, and I've learned. And it made me super vulnerable because I'm a middle child. I
Hmm.
was already in need of much more attention, let's put it that way, than other people in my family. And that's where I got my value. And that's what I had to recognize through the years is I was putting my value into and depending my value on relationships and feeling loved by this other person, when in fact I am a whole person all by myself, and I'm spiritual, so I have my God is a part of that, as well, and how he sees me. But I had to recognize that the reason I skipped from relationship to relationship to relationship, because I've had 3 or 4 now that have been abusive, is because I was looking for my value in that relationship. And because of my childhood experiences, I was somewhat expecting to be treated that way. And I didn't think I was worth any more than that. I
Mm.
thought that, that's the way. So all those parameters, I think, played into being extra vulnerable to going into abuse, and then we have the spiritual side of it. We have, that I was raised, in the church, and I was raised with that belief that you do whatever you can to save your marriage. Anything, whatever it takes, and you submit more and you pray more and you fast more and you pray that your husband's going to change. And we know now, that doesn't happen.
Right.
That they control themselves and we control ourselves. And sometimes we do have to get away as a last resort when somebody does not get help, and that's okay. And that's God approved. And that's important for people to know. But yes, I think I was extra vulnerable and I was seeking my attention and my value, in those people. And there was a part of me that didn't think I was worth anymore. And when I got to that point of realizing how valuable I am as a person. Not to sound conceited, we are each one of us extremely
Of
valuable.
course. No, no,
Then I
no.
stopped, right. Then I stopped accepting that in my life, and I insisted on being respected, and I set boundaries, and I said I'm worth more than this, and I am not going to stick around if you do this, this, or this, and or if you do this, I'm going to do this instead. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that until I recognized my true worth and my true value.
Right. Right. Because, as you mentioned, you went on to, have multiple abusive relationships. But you had told me that your 17-year marriage was the most impactful. Um, and can you tell us a little bit more about that experience? Was the abuse physical, mental, emotional, or a little bit of everything?
Sure. Yeah, that was a tough one. My husband was in law enforcement,
Oh, no.
which makes it even harder.
Yeah.
Because the times I did call the cops, they literally would come pat him on the shoulder and say, "Sorry, you're
Oh,
having a bad day, brother," and they would leave the kids and I in the house. This was a very small community at the time. So therefore, I immediately learned, okay, I have no help when it comes to law enforcement, and that. So it started out psychological and emotional and verbal abuse and control issues. Immediately when we came back from our honeymoon, my bridesmaids were still in town because we came back a little early. And they, of course, wanted to do lunch and shop at the mall. And they wanted to see, how was the honeymoon? Tell us all about it and all of this. And I was like, oh, I'd love to see them, And immediately he put his foot down and said, no, number one, if you do this, you're choosing them over me. Number two, we just got married. So basically, I own your time. Nobody else owns your time. And some of them were leaving town. So I was really sad. But again, I had been raised with that, husband's the head, right? So, okay. So I didn't go. And then that started getting harder and harder. And there was one point where my brother was getting married 2 states away, and I was not supposed to go to the wedding. We had 2 young kids at the time, and that was the excuse, was that, I'll be alone with the kids. And I said, we can get you childcare help. Grandma will come over. I need to go. Weddings are important. This is probably my brother's only wedding, right? It would seem pretty important to me. And I went anyway. And what I did, I shudder to look back because I completely adjusted the schedule to go based on his reaction. So I literally went to California in one day. I flew out early. I went to their wedding. I was at an hour of their reception, and then I had to run back to the airport
Oh my gosh.
to get home. And the consequences for that were severe. There was a lot of verbal, emotional, silent treatment for days. He was really upset that I went. I'm like, I needed to go. It wasn't a choice. I hurried up. I made it as quick as I could. And now I look back and I think, wow, look what moves I was making, to make sure that his reaction was not as, severe. And that's how it continued through our relationship. He was very addicted to opiates. He was a patient of the pain clinic. He has since passed away due to his decisions in that regard, which was really sad. And I had to grieve like a spouse, even though I was a next spouse, but that was tough.
Sure.
He is the father of my three kids.
Of course.
And I never wanted it to go that way. So it did get physical twice, and it did get sexual as well, but it was built up to that over that, 17 years. And, looking back, I know some ladies have had, and I never discount anybody's experience. Some ladies have had very physical abuse, but we kind of have learned in the industry, and I can vouch that really recovering from that emotional and psychological, and even spiritual abuse is much harder, and it's
Oh my God,
ingrained
yes.
in you.
Yeah.
And you think this is this is what I'm worth, and this is up to me to fix, not to him, and I must be doing something wrong. And of course, they're also implanting that in your head. This is your fault. This is my fault.
Right. And this
You
is
got
where again, and this is again where I need to say it doesn't matter if it happened one time or two
hmm
times. You were abused. And it doesn't matter what level, comparing it to, we can't compare our traumas to other people,
right.
you know. What you went through was horrendous. The years of all of the mental abuse, the fact that it got physical twice and the sexual aspect of it, that is horrific.
hmm
And I don't want you to minimize your trauma.
Yeah.
and say, oh, well, it's not, because you said it. You said, well, it's not, some people have it a lot worse.
Mhm.
But
I wanted to explain that not because I felt that way, but because
oh, good.
I hear that, and I hear people say, they minimize things, right? And so
Yes,
they
yes.
come in and they're like, it's not like he ever beat me up or threw me down the stairs, and it doesn't matter, there. So that's kind of why I said that, just to let you know.
Okay,
I
good.
understand that
Thank you.
my experience is
You see,
impacted.
I won't let that go by.
As neither do I, so I appreciate that.
Exactly. So, at what point, actually, you know what? We're about 5 minutes away from the hour mark, and I
Mhm.
have so many more questions for you. I really would like to ask you, can you come back for our next show and continue
Sure.
um, our conversation? Because there's just so much more to ask you. I mean, I still have a few questions for you before we go today, but before I get into the incident that happened with your ex-husband, I want to save that for the next show because that's more, I know that's going to take some time to get into. So so I'm going to kind of skip past that. But in our last 6 minutes, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, you've mentioned that you've written a couple of books, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell the listeners about your books and where they might be able to find them.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
You're
Yes.
welcome.
Knowing me, because I'm like a bull in a china shop, I went ahead and wrote about my issues, kind of like you did, and not
Yeah.
all survivors do that. But I have not written my personal story, but I do write about human trafficking, and that's a chord that strikes in my heart of something I really want to make a difference. Because I started out on this journey not thinking that human trafficking happens in the United States, thinking it was only a third world problem, and that's absolutely not the case as I researched. And so I did release 2 books in a series. I also have a free gift for everybody, but this is Innocent Lives. It's my first book. And this is a journey of 2 gals who are actually kidnapped and trafficked. And they go on 2 very different journeys that I wanted to highlight because abuse happens in different ways. One's very evil, one's not so evil, but he's saving her from the big evil. And so they kind of develop a relationship, which, as you can imagine, a lot of my experience went into that one. And then I do have a book set of two ebooks that are a little shorter called Penny and Rose, and those are available as a gift to your listeners. And you just need to go to, yeah, it's very cool. So you just need to go to innocentjourneys.com and sign up. It will also put you on my mailing list, but I literally only send out like once a month, and you'll get a free download of those 2 ebooks that you can read. And that's my free gift to your listeners today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. Well, I tell you, you have just a wealth of knowledge within you, and the list of questions that I have for you goes on and on and on. So, but I'm so happy that you were able to join me today.
I'm glad. Thank you for having me. The next day would be the 24th, FYI, just so you know.
Thank you. Yes, that will be my next show. The
And we
20.
also did not cover the 8 types of abuse, although we have it on your screen. So we should probably cover that one next time as well.
That's exactly why I wanted
Okay. Yes,
to.
most people teach there's 3 types, and I'm here to tell you there's actually 8. So at ARMS, the organization I work for, they all come into play, and they're all just as important. So we should cover.
Wow. Okay, so you hear that, everyone? So she's going to be back with me. So yeah, so you guys can come back and we'll finish this conversation. We're going to find out what the 8 types of abuse are. I have more questions about Julie's 17-year marriage, which, trust me, you do not want to hear, or you do not want to miss the story that she has to tell us that happened to her and her kids, actually. And with that, if you would like to be a guest on Survivor Strong, you can visit www.survivorstrongpodcast.com and complete the Tell Your Story section. I look forward to hearing from all of you. I thank all of you for joining me for episode 25 of Survivor Strong. We will be back on Friday, March 10th at 11 a.m. right here, live on Fireside, Facebook, and YouTube. And remember, everyone, you got this. We are all in this together. Until next time, everyone.